with Gannon. Gannon in California. What is up, Gannon?
Oh, hey, I got through. Awesome. Hey, guys.
Hey, how's it going, dude?
Hi, good.
All right, Gannon.
Hey, Shannon.
I have a little description here of your call, and it says that, oh boy, here goes. You want our take on Jordan Peterson.
Oh, goodness.
Yes. So I've been listening to a lot of Jordan Peterson like over the last, I don't know, year or so. Shannon, admittedly, I'm a fan of yours, but I've only seen a couple chats, one with Saiten Bruggenkate and the other with Adam Friended. And
okay.
Yeah. And that was the one I actually wanted to address because he's sort of, he's a huge Jordan Peterson pusher. So
no.
So, I mean, I've kind of heard you already describe what you think before about it, I think, but I just wanted to see if you had any maybe updated thoughts on it. If you, I don't know, have any opinion on his definition of God, which is this giant, like 2-hour high resolution description, which is entirely metaphorical and, psychology based. So, and since you have a degree in psychology, I thought that would be interesting to hear. So.
I'm not sure if I've ever heard him succinctly give a description of his conceptualization of God, but the gist of it, and you can correct me if I'm wrong because I very well could be wrong. I've read 12 Rules, but I don't watch a lot of his stuff. And I read it relatively. I didn't read it. I listened to it as I was driving to Edmonton. So, to be fair, so I was kind of tuned in and out for some of it. But his definition of God seems to be such that he defines God as a set of principles that should be aspired to, that he deems to be principles that are beneficial for society. And he chooses to live his life as though the God that represents that set of principles, those principles that we would have defined or would define as ultimately morally good, we should live our lives in accordance to that God existing. And he is a proponent for Christianity because he believes Christianity is the best instantiation of those principles that's malleable enough that people could live their lives in accordance to those principles and kind of cast off the components of the religion that directly contradict those principles in certain aspects, because he also sees Jesus as the ultimate instantiation of the archetype of the hero in that you see manifesting itself over and over and over again through literature, but which is a good archetype to wish to adhere to or to aspire towards, but has the added bonus of also being a physical representation and manifestation of that ultimate metaphysical, metaphorical God that represents all of these admirable moral qualities. Does that sound as though I'm succinctly?
That's almost spot on. The only things I would add are just like it's the like I'm sort of reading description of his. So he had a discussion with Sam Harris in Vancouver.
I watched that. Yeah.
I'm kind of reading the transcript from what his description of it was. And one of the things that I think is, it's like he's defining it as God as a concept, therefore God exists kind of thing. So it's not that it's supernatural. It's not that it's a being as such. It's that it's an idea and it's an ethos and it's, God is...
a conceptualization is kind of how I described it.
I specifically remember him being in an interview and somebody asking him if he thought like there was a historical person of Jesus like rising from the dead, and he just like didn't really give a very clear answer on that. So I would say like his position as Christian or non-Christian is like debatable. I mean, maybe like we're kind of talking about a metaphysical deistic conception of God, but like I don't know any mainstream Christianity really.
I don't even think that he has a deistic conceptualization of God.
Yeah.
I think that his conceptualization of God is a set of supreme concepts that we should all attempt to adhere to.
But see, isn't this interesting? Because we can talk about these interpretations we might have about these beliefs because they're just not clear. They're just not super clear. Here's one thing I'll say about Jordan Peterson. I don't think I've talked about him much. Well, I'm not sure if I've talked about it. I think we talked about it a little bit before, but I can't say anything about what he says about psychology and stuff. That's not my field. I do know that he has talked about postmodernism. That's a little bit more in my realm of, I'm not going to say expertise, I'm going to say realm of knowledge, okay? And he has these kinds of dangerous conflation of different kinds of ideas, and probably with psychology as well, as Shannon could attest to. But I know that these kinds of conflations of like Marxism and postmodernism and all these kinds of movements and stuff are basically forming, I mean, he talks about narratives, but really by doing what he's doing, he's creating a new narrative about what these ideas are and what they're supposed to represent and what they mean. Instead of people looking at the original source material of a lot of these texts, they're relying on Jordan Peterson to kind of give them the cut. So like most people don't know what postmodernism is or what it's about when you talk about them. They really don't know. And here is somebody who is giving them information about what they think it is and what it means politically for them. And that's giving people these ideas that not only are not correct, but can incentivize people to do the wrong thing and to protest and to make these big stinks about things that aren't either not happening or are happening, but like way out of proportion that isn't happening the way that they say that they're happening. And it can be dangerous. I think some of the rhetoric he has said is definitely dangerous. I'm not saying that everything he's ever said is wrong or doesn't need to be said either, but I am saying that whenever you talk about something that you're not an expert in and you don't have everything you need to know, you can influence people to do stuff. And I think we've already seen that with some of his followers. If you look at people who used to be quote-unquote followers of Jordan Peterson speak out about the time that they talked about when they were talking to other people, they sound like, and they have self-described themselves as leaving a cult, a kind of cult of personality. I don't know if that's the intention. I highly doubt that it is, but people are drawn to these ideas, and it's causing quite a stir, and it worries me. It really does worry me.
So I'm curious now that you said that, because the description of postmodernism that he's given is, and I'm nowhere near, I'm a dummy. I mean, I don't know much about this stuff at all, but the description I've heard him give time and time again is basically that there's an infinite number of facts and that there's an infinite number of interpretations of those facts, and that's postmodernism. There's no hierarchy of value for postmodernism. So
Dan's about to die.
So like, listen, I'm not about to give a lecture on postmodernism on here, okay? Here's what I will say. Postmodernism means different things to different postmodern authors. Authors that have been described as postmodern never called themselves postmodern, and have been interpreted as postmodern, even though they're not postmodern. Some modernists have been called postmodern, like all kinds of things. Obviously, we talked about like, the thing I noticed the most from Peterson is, like I was saying before, is calling these people Marxists and saying that these people are trying to control speech. I mean, the whole like...
He does say it as a single string, like postmodern neo-Marxist.
Yeah, postmodern neo-Marxist. Like that's not a thing. That's not a thing. He is literally, that's an idea created out of the air. And when he's talking about narratives, when he's talking about these structures, like he is creating a new narrative by talking about these ideas in this way. He is engaging in postmodern rhetoric in some ways. He is giving new interpretations to ideas, which, again, that's not all of what postmodernism is, but interpretation and examination of structure and the breakdown of structure and post-structuralism it can be a part of some postmodernism. So it's mind-numbing. It's mind-blowing, I should say. Mind-blowing how you can take these ideas and just completely say the opposite of what they are, and sometimes and convince people that this is what they are, because the average layperson, like I said, doesn't know a lot of this stuff. And I'm not saying that's their fault. There's very complex ideas that people have been writing books about for years and years. And when somebody comes in and says, here, I'm the expert, let me tell you what you need to think about this and what's going on in this country and how these people in these elitist positions are warping you and doing these things, then suddenly you're radicalizing people. You're starting a movement of things. And that's why we're seeing what we're seeing right now. We're seeing people doing these things, doing these protests, making these, awful comments online. And who knows how long it's going to continue,
He does that with religion a lot. Like he's essentially he's taken his concepts of what a moral system should be, the name God, and then grafted it onto the Bible because he sees that Christianity as having enough wiggle room, and it's similar enough that he could graft it nicely onto that and convince people that it's a new version of that's always been there, and that's the way that they should lead and conduct their lives, and that every other aspect of it, of Christianity, like in the Bible itself, that is contradictory to that is just because it's not being it should be interpreted as literature, which is that's his innovation, I think, as an incidental or accidental apologist. Is he sees the Bible as a valuable piece of literature that you can graft a moral system upon, and he sees society as benefiting from instantiating that moral system. So if you interpret the Bible as literature, attribute the moral characteristics that he sees as valuable to the God that is emergent from that literature, and then convince people or live your life, in his instance, as though it exists and is true, then religion is a way of policing people into adhering to beneficial moral structures, and policing people into adhering to what he sees as beneficial moral structures is better for society. And that's essentially the crux of his argument, is that even though it's not true, these are good morals. We can graft them onto this, and this helps control people's behavior.
Yeah. Well, I think by true, he actually means it evolutionarily speaking. So these ideas have survived for.
Why does the Bible? Why is the Bible needed unless it's needed because it's an agent of control?
Well, it's just an old set of stories that have this timeless nature, in the sense
there are
that
millions and millions and millions of old sets of stories.
Yeah, here's what I'll say. I think you're right about this archetype idea. I think it's this conflation of what we can observe from archetypes and like what we can sometimes say is true, and like it's a difference between should and what is, I think, is what it is. Maybe there is some truth in some of this archetypes that he's talking about, in what we see about the world, but that doesn't mean that that's necessarily what needs to happen, or that it's a society that we want to continue to live in. I mean, I'm talking specifically, the examples I'm thinking of are the gender roles that are being supported. I know that at least my understanding of Peterson, and I could be wrong, but I believe he does have specific ideas about men and women and how these gender roles should happen in society. I'm saying this word should because I think he does have an opinion on this should. And
it's not like a top-down assertion, though. It's like the manifestation of the masculine and feminine, as far as feminine being nature and masculine being father culture, as he says. So it's not like these are the instantiations of things that like men and women have to do, and that there's only two genders, etc.
Maybe you say that, Gannon, but like a lot of these people who follow Jordan Peterson, I think they do say that. I think they do say that they're complaining about these ideas not being represented wholly enough, and that these ideas are being mixed up, and that they're not as clearly demarcated as they used to be. Maybe Peterson himself isn't saying it, but I've seen people who do think that do kind of follow these ideas.
Yeah, but the followers I'm not talking about. I'm talking about Jordan Peterson, because Jordan Peterson's like view of this high resolution view, I think, is.
How do you know that that's his view? Because if his words are ambiguous enough that they can be.
I mean.
So if somebody else read that transcript, could they potentially and very easily have a different interpretation because his words are ambiguous enough that they can be imbued with whatever intention you desire?
Kind of, yeah. It's like art.
Then what is the value of them, and what is the value of them when navigating reality if they can be imbued with your existing perspective and don't enlighten you?
He puts it in a more clear way than a much clearer way than the words of the source that he's reading from. So he reads the story of Genesis. He reads the story of Cain and Abel, which is like a paragraph long, and he extracts from it this 3-hour long lecture about it, and he puts it in plain English. And I mean, to the extent that I understand it, it makes a lot of sense, and it doesn't like radicalize me to do anything harmful to people. I guess it might for some.
So you have respect for his interpretation of the text, because it's
well, yeah. I mean, it's like this. Here's the story, and each time it says God, it's like that's is that God, or is it his 2-hour-long description of God? And then if you like unpack the entire thing, then it becomes like this hugely long, like if you wrote it all down, it'd be a novel. It'd be huge, and it would all be an extraction from this one paragraph story. Anyway, the main thing I wanted to get across was just like, because he's a clinical psychologist and he has like science-based evidence for a lot of his positions, I'm wondering, like, is that something you agree with in that sense? I mean, you might not call it God. It's not the supernatural being kind of God. And in that sense, he's kind of been put on the spot time and time again with people. And it seems to me like each time he's trying to say that he's an atheist like us, but he doesn't want to come out and say that, because that would do a lot of harm to the people that, as a clinical psychologist, he's talked through that are religious in the supernatural sense.
Why would existing as an atheist be harmful to a religious person?
If they're dangerous people, that if they look up to Jordan Peterson because he's a clinical psychologist and he's helped them in their lives, and they find out that he's actually...
And he can't do that as an atheist?
Yeah, like that might actually cause some harm to people, and that's a reason.
Being an atheist causes harm to people?
No. It's that if he came out and said, I don't believe in God the same way that Ken Ham believes in God. If he said those literal words, that could cause some people to flip out. And
okay.
I think that's a good reason to not come out and say that.
So he needs to instantiate a lie in order to maintain a perception about himself?
I don't know if lie is the right word, though, for the reason I just gave. Because it's like, it's a useful fiction, maybe. Like, as... I don't know.
That's a reconstruction of the English language in order to allow for the fact that is a lie.
It's lying by withholding information, right?
No, it's lying by flat out saying he's obfuscating the information because he doesn't want to get pegged down, and it's not necessarily because it's harmful. It's because that allows people to create reinterpretations and perceive him as religious when they are religious and trust him, and then it allows people like us. Not like me, but people who are like me, who are atheists, to look at him and say, oh, also, he's like me. That makes him like everybody. So like I said before, everybody who wants to can imbue their existing perspective. And thus, it's not valuable as anything other than artistic interpretation. Like you brought up how he interprets Genesis. And he interprets Genesis as though his definition of God is the definition that is there. That's great. If he was the one who wrote Genesis, that would be incredibly valuable. However, what he's saying is this was the intention of the authors who wrote the text. If you speak to somebody who studied Sumerian and Hebrew and knows the history of those books, they will tell you a different story. So that's great that his interpretation fits there. Lots of others fit there too. Ken Ham's fits there as well. That doesn't make it valuable. The reason that it's valuable to people is because they're able to relate to it and imbue upon it. And one of the reasons is because he allows that ambiguity. So that's why I don't see anything that he says necessarily valuable, and some of it is dangerous because people argue for him as though he is their leader and cannot be questioned. And if you can't scrutinize people's ideas without fear of attack, there's a problem. And I think it needs to be assessed.
There it is, Gannon.
Okay.
Any more comments? We do have a few more comments we gotta get to on the line here. I think that's a good way to kind of sum it up. I
feel like this went in the same direction that it did with Adam when you talked to him. It's like, yeah, I mean, the way that you interpret it, the way he says things is like, it has this duality nature to it. It's like, if you're an atheist, you hear what he's saying. If you're a theist, you hear what he's saying. And it's like, in both aspects, if he gets it across to you correctly, then
that's a problem.
If it inspires you to do good in the world. No,
I see that as a problem.
If it inspires you to do good in the world, then that's actually better.
It's not always going to inspire good in the world, though, because if you have two different interpretations of something, then you're always. It's the same. Like this is what Christians.
It's never going to be science. This is never going to be.
This is what religion has done for centuries, right? This is what religious people have done for centuries. They've taken their texts, they reinterpreted them from how many times, Gannon, have you heard now in Christianity in 2019 that, oh, hey, you could actually be gay now? Like, oh, this was something in the New Testament and they weren't talking about our modern conceptions of homosexuality. Like whether or not that's
a lot of people
whether or not that's
issue,
actually
so they had to do something to keep surviving.
But Gannon,
they transformed the text.
Here's
right?
my thing, right? Whether or not that's actually true and that interpretation of the text is correct, it's still changing the narrative. It's still doing it for political convenience. And I think that's what we're seeing here. I think that there is a construction of a narrative that aligns with people's politics to keep them going, to keep them motivated to do what they do, because it fits what they're already doing in the first place, of what they already believed in the first place. I really think that's what's going on.
I think that's fair. There's one more thing. So I was at.
Hurry up, because we got a couple more callers here. We got to get to it. But
right on. So I was at a atheist convention thing, and Matt Dillahunty was up there with Aaron Ra and I forgot the other guy's name, and David Silverman. And I asked the question, like, if you could rewrite the Bible so that it was more morally correct in an objective sense, because Matt believes in objective morality, and if it could be as unambiguous as possible, would it look more like a science book or more like a storybook? And he said it would be a mix of both. And what I wanted to follow up with that and didn't really get a chance was, well, if it could be both and there would be some story elements to it, then who's to say that the stories you tell wouldn't be interpreted down the line as something good or bad later, and that would require some sort of later interpretation to follow up on it?
It's almost like we shouldn't have a book. It's almost like we shouldn't just have one book, and that it's an ongoing story, and we're continuing to discover. Here's what. I'm back on Jordan Peterson for a second. Jordan Peterson. This is one of the reasons that he frustrates me, because Jordan Peterson has eventually reinstantiated or reinvented Christianity in a way that allows it to adopt atheists as converts while still retaining their identities somewhat as atheists. That is what his legacy is. And you're one of them. Which is why we're having this conversation where you, as an atheist, are defending the existence of, efficacy of, reasonability of, and necessity for a religious text, as though it maintains some value that
I just don't
supersedes the value of other. Well, exactly. No, I agree. I think that we should cast off doctrines. Absolutely. There's no answers to every question in a book, and existing as though there are is a mistake. It's an ongoing conversation, and there's millions and millions of books being written, and maybe the one that has the answer, or the millions that do have the answer, haven't been written yet, and likely they haven't. So if we choose to exist,
the Bible, though.
He uses other books to interpret it, and then holds it up as the ultimate book.
Yep, the authority that we should take
that represents the best instantiation of them all, because it allows you to have the emergent property of a God that he can imbue with those moral systems. And I think that's dangerous.
All right.
Gannon.
I tried. I tried.
Thank you. No, seriously.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for calling. This was
a good conversation.
That was a hot take. That was some hot takes going on right there.